So the final panel discussion is something that we wanted to give the startups to come back and ask questions, right? So this panel is named How Do You Innovate with Startups? Enterprise Becoming Startup Friendly. How do we want to make, or what do you think the enterprise, or how does the enterprise should treat startups when they're approached for new business opportunities? So for this panel, I'd like to invite Ravi Gururaj, President iBangalore, and member NASSCOM Executive Council and Product Council. He'll be chairing the discussion. James, General Manager, Shell. Pranko Sharma, Engagement Lead, Zinao. And Will Wilhelm, ABB, India. Rajashri Rao, Head of Partnerships, Rolls-Royce. I would request all the panel members to be on the dais. All yours.
So I thought we'll start with introductions. If each of you could, basically just tell us what your role is at your company, what you're doing to work with startups, and what your experience has been over the last couple of years. That'll be very helpful. Maybe, James, we could start with you.
Thank you. James Unschreiner. I lead the Shell E4 startup program, obviously for Shell. A little bit about me. I've been with Shell for about 21 years, computer science background, and started focusing on connecting with startups about 8 years ago. So really focused on how do we bring together startups in a large company like Shell. That started in the United States, and then about 2 years ago, I relocated here to Bangalore to run this program. So the idea behind the program is that we accelerate India's transition to a sustainable energy future by working with entrepreneurs. And we have multiple tracks to do that to support entrepreneurs at different maturity levels.
And how long have you been here?
I've been here 2 years as of October, so a little over 2 years, and the program will be 2 years old in January.
And Rajshri, you're with Rolls-Royce. You're pretty new to them, but you're very excited in your new role. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're working with startups?
Sure. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you for having me here. Hi, I'm Rajashri Rao. I head the partnerships and ecosystems for Rolls-Royce for APAC as part of our Square Data Labs. So I've been in the industry for the last 20 years, having worked for IBM, Intel, SAP, and also doing my own consulting and having worked extensively with the Singapore government on the Smart Nation initiatives. I've just relocated back to India early this year. It's been quite exciting to be part of this journey of innovation, especially within Rolls-Royce, where it's not a traditional corporate like any other technology organizations. Just to clarify, Rolls-Royce is not the automobile industry or not the automakers. We are the engine manufacturing organization. And our business functions across civil, defense, and power systems. And India being the third largest ecosystem in the world, Rolls-Royce decided to also, invest into India and look to leveraging the skill, the innovation drive, and how we could leverage the growth market over here in not reinventing the wheels and leveraging what is already there and trying to address the business problems with a faster turnaround times and bringing value to the business. In this journey, so Rolls-Royce early this year made an announcement as part of the initiative on launching our first accelerator program. And we are quite excited to say that we have announced our first cohort with 3 startups who are working alongside our business to address the specific business problems of Rolls-Royce. And they've just been onboarded and the program has just kick-started. And we would be looking forward how we are able to be successful in not recreating, but co-creating, and bringing the blend of technology and domain, and that is what we are venturing into.
Great, thank you. And I know you're, Wilhelm, you're sitting in for Arvind, who unfortunately took ill and was not able to join us. Thank you for standing in. I know you've already done duty earlier today. Could you tell us what you're doing at ABB Ventures?
Yeah, actually, I'm roughly 35 years on the job, and let me say, knowing a bit about startups also comes from my first time in India, 2004 till 2007. Actually, that when ABB decided to have R&D in India. And actually, we were a small organization, 20 people, 25 people. We grow over all the years, but I appreciated always how the enthusiastic people are coming and they want to grow and they want to do more. And now I'm about 7 years again in Bangalore and heading the development center for ABB. And that is also where I'm working very closely with my friend Arvin. And he's heading the ATV, the ABB Technology Ventures, where we are already working for a long time in India with startups, but more on the venture part. And 2 weeks ago, actually, we formally launched now that also Indian startups can join our Synolib organization, which is headed in Sweden. And that is our program now to bring the startups closer to R&D and to work on the R&D level and not only on the business level. And we will talk about this during the session a bit more.
Great, look forward to that. And Prankar, you're with Zinnov. Could you tell us a little bit about what Zinnov's perspective is on how corporates are working with startups? Introduce yourself.
Sure, sure. So I'm sure a lot of you here would know about Zinnov, but I'll just do a small Zinnov commercial for people who don't. So Zinnov is a 17-year-old management consulting firm. We have been helping companies globalize, look at innovation ecosystems outside of the headquarters, and look at digital and product engineering transformation roadmaps. Around startups, we are working with a lot of corporates in defining their models to really work with startups. So it could be a startup accelerator program where we've worked with global companies like NetApp and Target to set up the accelerator programs, as well as some Indian companies. So with SL Group, for example, we worked in designing their startup accelerator program. The GE Healthcare Edison platform that was recently came out with their startup mission was in India was also something that we work closely on. And in general, alongside our consulting engagements, we've been working closely both with corporates to really understand their partnership strategy, as well as with a lot of startups on designing their go-to-market strategy, as well as how they can navigate the corporate ecosystem to really get a target market for their solutions or understand their customer segment better. With industry bodies like NASSCOM, and Ravi can probably tell us more about it, we have been closely helping in developing the ecosystem of startups in India. We are coming up with the annual India Startup Report, where we are tracking more than 9,000 technology startups in India today. So from a very global as well as very India perspective, we have been working very closely around the startup ecosystem for a long time now. I at Zinnov work as an engagement lead and look at the IoT practice globally for the company.
Great, thank you. So, before I go to the next round of questions, we want to make this interactive. It's the last session of this event. I want the audience to leave happy. So please, those that have not had a chance to ask questions in the past, jot down, we've got an hour to go. So I'm going to run out of questions after about 20 minutes in. And so we could look for you all to ask some insightful questions that will, kind of get us more engaged. So James, tell us a little bit about your model, right? You've now engaged with 20 startups. What's working, what's not, how are you filtering? How do you even decide which startups to work with? How do you bring in ideas from your line of business managers, your business units? What is the process internally? Give us some insight.
Yeah, there's a lot I can answer there. So internally, let's start there. The process is to identify which businesses we'll work with, and I traditionally do that on an annual basis, not to say there won't be something that comes up through the year where we'll say, okay, there's an opportunity here, we can work together. But the idea is to identify some businesses that are interested in working with startups, identify some themes with them, and then for each track, I mentioned earlier that we run different tracks for startups. So we'll have what we call growth track, which is for startups with pilotable solutions, scale track, startups with deployable solutions, international track to help startups outside India deploy their solutions and soft land into India, and then a digital track. So how do we move at a pace that a digital startup needs to move and support digital startups? So each one is designed specifically to support startups in these various scenarios. And then we take these themes that we identify internally, summarize those, because I may work with maybe 10 to 20 different business units internally, and I'll summarize those into maybe 4 to 10 themes. So some tracks only have 2, actually, that we'll communicate externally on. So I just try to aggregate some stuff together. And then we decide which themes will run for which track, and then we look across the ecosystem and we say which are the best startups that we believe in the India ecosystem to deliver value for our business in these themes. And we take probably a bit of a unique approach. Yes, you can go apply to the website, and yes, we will review your application and potentially move it onto our top 50 list, but we really are about looking across the ecosystem, finding the best startups, and then we'll reach out and call you and say, hey, we've got this program, we have this opportunity, does it seem like a fit for you? And some of you may have had that call and that conversation. If you have, congratulations, because we obviously don't call everyone. But yes, so we also look at the applications that come in, and then we select them for the program. Maybe I'll stop there for now and
Sure.
add to it.
And I'll come back to, when you call them and you say congratulations, what should the startup be thinking, right? And we'll come back to that, why should they jump at the offer, and how do you handle them after that, right? So same question for you, Rajeshri.
Okay, so for Rolls-Royce, definitely this is a game changer. And being a very traditional organization, we've taken that a leap into how we would like to look at working on the business problems. It's not necessarily inside out, it has to be outside in as well. So we decided not to reinvent the wheels and leverage what is already there in the market and how we bring the culture of both the technology and the domain. So bringing the culture of startups, having to work with a traditional organization like us, also, and then getting our, the employees also to engage with the startups gives them the blend of having a little the different mindset altogether. So that's one area. The second thing is, early on when we announced the accelerator program, we definitely engaged technologies as our accelerator partner. So we did a call for application. We did not give the problem statement or the challenge. We did a call for application based on the emerging technologies. We did a very strict vetting. I'm not going to go through the huge process we followed, but out of 411, we drilled down to 3. Our first cohort comprises of 3 startups, which is SpyChain, ClearCoat, and Imaginate. And each one of them are aligned to a particular business problem statement from the business units, and they're working with the business team to addressing this challenge jointly. How we did this whole vetting is, to even get to them, we let the business team engage with the startups directly during before the pitch, the actual pitch session, the demo day. We made each one of the startups who we had shortlisted to meet with our business team to share their technology, product, solution, and the business to discuss what is the problem we are trying to solve. And also, one of the things with a company like Rolls-Royce is we also have highly confidential data. So it's not like a traditional organization where data can be easily shareable. So that there's a huge IT, export compliance, and other challenges. If any one of us have to work with us, any of the startups or any of the ecosystem, there are a lot of things we have to follow, and the processes and everything before we get there. And today, it's a beautiful journey because how do we co-innovate or co-create within the constraints of whatever we have and still make that happen. And that is where I think I thrive into making this a success for Rolls-Royce.
So the data thing can work both ways, right? Startups are also worried about their IP, and so we should talk about that later, and I'll come back to you on that.
Absolutely.
You know, how should startups think about it? You know, especially if they got an idea that's very relevant to you, how do they make sure they can extract value too, right? And capture that. So, well, how about you at ABB? You know, y'all have done the range of stuff from investing to, incubating to partnering, right? What model works best for you?
So we are interacting with startups already for many years in India, but it was more, let me say, an informal approach from the R&D perspective. So the ABB Technology Venture is in India for several years, and that is actually the second step. If we are really coming to the point that we have selected startups where we are actively investing, that is working well, but we found out, and actually we took it from our colleagues from Sweden, that they have this engagement program called Synerleap before. And that is really where, let me say, we are coming together. They joined Synerleap as a startup, no strings attached, and we will explore for several months, 6 months, 12 months, whether we can work together, we can solve problems and customer problems together, and then we will see how this develops over the time. So it's really that we are opening the R&D organization towards the startups, and we have completed by now some 4 case studies or proof of concepts directly with end customers, very successful, very innovative ideas, and now we are really trying to accelerate this further, getting more startups on board, finding out which customer problems we can solve together, how they can disrupt how we are thinking in our traditional approaches, how to do automation, how to do monitoring, how to do maintenance. And I'm really looking forward to accelerate this program even further and to welcome more startups in India to this program.
Great. So the Synerleap program, if you can tell us a little bit more, you already said a little bit there, but it's basically a reference customer plus ABB plus the startup working together on a solution.
Initially, it can be only a startup, let me say. If we come together and we meet at such an event here and we think we can do something together, we can start without a customer case. Once we have decided that we come together, actually, Arvind and myself, we will actively go into our organization and scan for proof of concept or business cases. That is the one possibility. Otherwise, many startups are so active themselves that they already interact with many of our customers, and they have done proof of concepts in the industry, and then they are automatically attractive to work together and to find out. But then the focus is a bit different. Then we are more looking in how to scale the solution and what the possible business models are behind. So let me say I'm a little bit like a scrum master in this situation. I'm looking for how the startup can contribute, but also how I can remove the impediments within a large organization like ABB.
Great. I think that's something Rajshri also mentioned, that there's this whole imperative to go disrupt internally as well and transform internally, right? That's part of the value prop. At Zinnov, you all see so many different models. I think we've got 3 leading European companies, I think just by coincidence where they're headquartered, but they're all global. You probably see many more across Asia and the US too doing this. What are the attributes of those that have worked successfully, especially those that are a little longer into this, right? Into this model of, kind of engaging with startups.
Right. So I think it really depends on the objective you're going after. And from an IoT perspective, I can tell you that there are probably 3 or 4 things that we have seen have worked well, and it, as I said, aligns with the goal that you're going to address. For example, if you are a IT services company is looking to serve your customers, it's probably a joint go-to-market that you want to do with a startup where they bring along a niche technology and you can serve them with the services and the domain that you bring in. For corporates, it could be around how you solve the business problem for your customers, and There too you could have different approaches. It could be a startup accelerator program that you could set up. A corporate VC program is also something that a lot of companies do. ABB Ventures, I think, would fall into that category. We have also seen that, especially around for companies that are looking to scale really fast and have that agile mindset, and sometimes today, if you think about it, the biggest problem for around digital technologies and around really building products is talent, right? So can you acquire the startup to plug in that gap is also something that comes to mind. And similarly, I think last but not the least, companies and even customers are today looking at a full stack solution that you need to take to them. It's not just a platform and then you can expect them to build over it. They're looking for the use case specific solution that would give them the business outcome that they're looking for, and that can only be done through orchestration of the ecosystem, and where startups could play a big role to solve that.
Got it. So let me ask a few provocative questions, devil's advocate position. William, I'll start with you first.
Okay.
So, let me hypothesize that it's a waste of time for you to work with startups. And let me put the other hat on and say it's a waste of time for the startups to work with you.
He gave me an early warning that he will come up with a question, and I asked actually whether he distributed any tomatoes in the audience. So I see you didn't. So actually...
No, we said we'd take a risk because the last session we could all run then. Anyway.
No, I think, yes, it is a challenge. To be open, yes, because there are so many startups around. And, but once you have found the right startup to work with, it adds a lot of value to the organization. And when I say the right startup, it is really, for me, let me say there's a group of startups who are actually copying what is already there. They try to do it a little bit cheaper, or they address customers, sometimes even our customers, with a little bit different approach. That are startups, okay, they might survive, they might not. But there are many, many startups who are really challenging how the industry is working today. That goes really in the areas, we talk a lot about data analytics and all this, but data analytics is only the tool. We see startups who really use this for advanced process control, model-based control, which is really challenging the status quo, how we are doing control today. Other startups entering the area of, I talked about this in the talk before, augmented reality, virtual reality. Will we still have a control room where some people sitting in front of 200 monitors for 8 hours a day? Or will this be replaced by augmented and virtual reality? These are the startups which are interesting. And these startups are bringing in ideas in a large organization like ours, where we might get the same ideas someday, but I think they are accelerating the innovation process, and that is really the value add. And if we then come together with a scalable solution that we can scale up together on the customer base as well as for the startup, then this is a clear win-win for the startup, being a good position in the market, having customer contact, and for us to help them to get this customer contact, to be allowed to scale, and then to do business together.
So, the way you would describe that, it's almost like a startup is reimagining where your business would head in 3-4 years, almost ahead of where, or adjacent to what you might be thinking internally, right?
Yep.
In terms of being successful in attracting your attention.
Yes, so we need to attract the attention of the startup, and it needs to be on eyesight. That means we need to start on the same level of discussion. So when we are interacting with a startup, we are starting not from the approach that we will acquire you once you see the value in your organization. No, we need to have the variety of startups. The variety means also covering a wider range of solutions. Let me say, when you want to build a customer solution, typical example, we talk about powertrains, where you have transformer, drive, motor, pump. Some startups are specialized on pumps, some are specialized on transformers. If we bring these 4 startups together with a very innovative idea and synchronize a little bit, we can really add value to the industry.
Got it. So Rajshri, talking about pumps and motors, I think I'll ask you about engines, aircraft engines, right? So where does a startup, how does a startup, start to provide you value? I mean, it's kind of I don't know how many startups here are working on aircraft engines or that could really provide you value, right? How would you identify those?
See, if you look at engine, that's a very different dynamics altogether because we've not, if you look at a lot of, like including my peers and my competitors, nobody has ever filed at least the patents because they don't never want to reveal their secret recipe. And that's why the data is always highly confidential. Now, coming back to that question, if you look at when you say engine manufacturing, the word manufacturing comes into play. So we follow a whole load of process. And today, there's a huge development that needs to happen, or innovation needs to happen in the manufacturing space itself, with Industry 4.0 coming in, with industrial IoT having a big play. And then supply chain comes into a big thing because we have a whole load of suppliers from different components that we
So you're a regular old business that way, right?
Sorry?
You're a regular old manufacturing business too, right?
Yes.
You
so
have
we
vendors,
have a
you have
blend.
supply chain.
We definitely have a blend of
So a lot of the solutions we've been talking about over the last 2 days could be of value, in manufacturing, various areas.
So yes, so that is what we're today looking at. But we have a different challenge when we come into, when we say manufacturing. It's not as simple to saying, okay, today we have a particular startup who's into some emerging technology, or we can simply plug into our existing system. It's not possible because we have different manufacturers in terms with the assembly process. Recently I was in Singapore, so I was looking at our assembly unit. I didn't get into the floor though, but I was just viewing from gallery. I saw that there is a different companies who are provided different instruments of different phase the assembly process has to flow through. And now the challenge comes in, how do you interoperable technology? How do you integrate, if we are innovating, how do you integrate that? So one of the missing factors is first, whether the startup solution do have that ability to integrate or interoperable within what is existing there. Now this is what, as I evolve, like I was talking to you now, I'm in the process of defining the strategy. How do we work forward into addressing all of this and then doing the co-innovation? And that is going to be literally a groundbreaking way of evolving through the journey of innovation, working along with the startups.
All right. So it's not easy for a startup to plug into existing processes.
No, it's
That's
not.
going to be half the challenge is how do you integrate them
Correct.
in a way that doesn't break your existing processes, right?
The early question when you talked about the POCs, right? Like you say, okay, startups are not interested in corporates or corporates are not interested in startups. It's not that. The most important is we need to do a lot of vetting before we even pick a startup and then say what exactly are we going to do? Have we already factored in all the dynamics that is there? To what degree will the startup be able to solve? And from there, how we will be evolved through the journey. It's not just the POC. We have to get to the pilot. And once the pilot is successful, then we talk about the larger implementation.
But your ratios are 3 out of 414. You've already scared everybody away. It's harder to get into your accelerator than it may be to get into IIT or something. So, anyway, well, you were hinting at what startup, congratulations, the same kind of ratio. You all are very selective in who you work with. So what can a startup expect? And how long is the engagement? And what do you think the startup should do once they get that call from you to really maximize the benefits of working with you all? You're one of the largest companies in the world on a market cap basis, right? And you have footprint everywhere, and you're now growing out your retail footprint in India too. And it's an area of great interest, renewable energy, being more productive in that area. A lot of E going on. E, I use the E very broadly, right?
Okay, yeah, let's talk a little bit. I'll focus my answer to that on the digital track because I think that's most relevant for the audience here. But I will say that each track was specifically designed for startups in those situations. So they vary in length and they vary in how they operate as far as hybrid, as physical presence versus remote, and all these types of things. So for our digital track, our mindset, or at least my mindset, is very much about how do we design a startup-friendly program. So first and foremost, the IP has to remain with the startup. That's a fundamental belief, that any IP, whether it's background or foreground IP, has to remain with the startup. I think that's important. But then also we need to look at the startup's needs at that particular point in time when they're working with us. I guess your question about what a startup should think about as they get that call is, how can a company like Shell help? So oftentimes the conversations I'll have with startups is, what are your challenges, and how can a company like Shell help? Because
So what if
obviously
the
you're doing
answer
lots
is
of different
funding
things.
and revenue?
Yeah, no, you know, entrepreneurs are very intelligent individuals, and I think there's deeper thought to that than the initial pilots and funding and that type of stuff. It's
They're much more subtle.
yeah, maybe that's it. But really, I think there's a package that several of us on the stage can provide for startups, and that package consists of industry knowledge, subject matter expertise, global connections, visibility, and credibility. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs actually understand that package actually is more meaningful than funding, which can come from numerous other places, and potentially a pilot as well. One pilot, great, but we really need 5, 7 to get traction, particularly when we're looking at the digital space. So our program is thinking along the entrepreneur lines, how do we get traction? So can we bring together not just Shell, but 6 or 8 or 10 other corporate partners into this program? And you look at our scale track, that's how it's designed. That's what we're going to be doing with digital track as well. And bring maybe 30 use cases and say, okay, let's work through these use cases, figure out which ones are relevant for you, and figure out how you can not interact with just Shell, but interact with maybe 5 companies at a time. And can you keep pace with us when we start talking about that? Because yes, we have trouble keeping pace with the startup, but when we bring several corporates together to work with that startup, let's really try to shift things and move things.
And you're already partnering, right? Some of you are, and some of you are interested in partnering, in fact, after meeting today. So that's great. Let's open it up to the audience. Please raise your hand. There's some mics running around here. Let's make it interactive. Don't be shy. Please, there's no bad question or good question. Just tell us who you are and a quick, brief question would be great.
Okay, my question is, you mentioned about giving exposure to the startups. I know Rolls-Royce makes maybe 1,000 products every year, which might look number-wise less, but each product is tens of millions. How do you give that exposure to startups? Because in India, the manufacturing, if you see, we talks about lots of products from the quantity perspective. How do you give that exposure? Just a bit of background. I represent a company where we make less than you from number of products perspective. So that's the reason I want to get your insights, how that exposure can be given to startups.
I think it's a wonderful question, and in fact, as just James was mentioning, I was going to add to his point, which is today when the startups work with us, when he said they're going to get the growth, they're going to get the exposure, they're going to get the access to the global connects, and not just that, the brand value, and most important, the domain knowledge, which is so critical as you evolve in the journey of what you're solving. The moment the startup who are working with us today are able to address the problem that we are facing and are able to bring a very good solution, and if the POC gets successful, obviously we're going to take back to the business and show what is the impact and the value it can bring, which means it's not just addressing the Rolls-Royce business problem, but it could be scalable for problems at industry at large. And then we look at going to market and commercializing or productizing that solution. Now to get to that, so how we do this, right? Today, the first cohort working with us, now we're talking to them the domain language. They are getting to learn about why it is a problem and what is the problem and how they need to be able to think through. So we've given them the challenge. We've told them where it fits in, what is the current scenario, where we are not getting the value. So that is where they bring the technology and using the creativity or whatever that they have been, the reason they've been shortlisted is because of their MVP already there. Now that is where we would co-create. So that is where they're getting the knowledge of the domain in a specialized manner.
So I guess it's both internal visibility within the company and then visibility to customers.
It's inside
and then
out and
visibility
outside in.
outside if it's all successful, right?
Yep.
Got it. You had another
Yep. Thank you.
One
It's-
second. Go one more.
I would like to add here also a little bit because you need to distinguish a little bit when you talk about product access. So let me say one side is really the domain knowledge, the product itself. And let me say, for example, when you join the Synerly program, you get access to hardware which is typically for a small startup not affordable at all. So when we are talking about big machinery, which is in 10,000 and hundred thousands of dollars, a startup will probably not work on it. But the second point is also how to access the products. Because in the earlier discussion, we talked a bit about control systems and that startups are excluded because these are all data. They will never get access because of proprietary protocols and all this. But that is very important to understand the customer case because most probably you don't need those data you're looking for. And let me say when you want, for example, want to make predictive maintenance, you need, for a motor, you need external sensors like vibration and so on, but you don't need to know the process data. So that's why I think the domain knowledge is on both sides, applying it to the process, applying it to the product, and then a lot of barriers will just disappear by some open talks, how to collaborate and how to contribute to a product.
In fact, one company, one startup that started working with a large corporate, the corporate had so many simulators for all kinds of scenarios that the startup would never have been able to test with all of those, right? Across the board to solidify their product. That's, potentially, I think what you're pointing to as well, right?
My name is Flight Lieutenant Kishore. I started a company in collaboration with the ITI. I'm also a senior member of IEEE. My question is not about my startup. I want to articulate a problem which in the last IoT Next, one of our colleagues also here, we approached one of the government officials interested in the approach IEEE from India is doing on edge analytics that we call it as IEEE 1931.1 called roof computing. And we have a few challenges. I'm also one of the contributing members. As IEEE has already brand value and credibility, I'm looking at you, if you are interested to fund that initiative to do further study on that problem statement whereby you help it, look at that as a startup and then help it to model it and then take it to the next steps of pivot.
Okay, so you're pitching them now. So maybe you could do that after the session, but do you have a question for them specifically? If not, we'll go to another, if there's any other questions in the audience. So we got one here.
Good evening. I'm Rahul Kalluri. I'm in the education space, so we are a small group that runs schools and colleges in South Bangalore. It's a bit off topic, my question, but as we're seeing more global enterprises come into India and setting up innovation centers, it creates a demand for local talent. But one of the plaguing issues in our country is graduates are not employable enough. So my question is, how can industry and academia work together to bridge the skill gap? So if you have any collaborations in your respective countries, through your respective organizations, I'd like to know about that and how we can set similar relationships in India.
Thanks.
Thank
So,
you.
William, I'll have you take it since you've been running a development center. You're probably closer to talent inbound, right?
Yeah, so the university collaboration program has a very, very long history in India for ABB. So I think we have a chair at certain IITs for several, I think more than 15, 20 years. And this is the, let me say, the collaboration with the universities. And, but I think you're addressing more the intermediate step, how to bring the education and how to bridge the education and the industry system. So, and that is actually, we try to work with certain universities on common publications. We have the master program, we have the PhD programs, and bringing the people into our organization to make their thesis at our challenges, so that works pretty well. Other way around, I think we need to get stronger really in going out to the universities and to the education system and to bring the domain knowledge in these organizations. I think that is still something where we can get better.
Any other questions? We got one.
Hi, I am Abhijit. I am a founder of Karabi Software. We are basically into integration platform. We have built a software platform for the data integration. So we are specifically working in the power and as well as the agriculture. So I would like to understand what are the different domains you are looking at, I mean, as far as startups are concerned. Second thing is, what is co-creation? Because you are a big company and we are a very small startup. So co-creation means we have some ideas, something we are doing it. Suddenly, if it is in your market interest, you will take it and then take it in a different direction. So how do you do that?
So his worry is you'll subsume him, or you'll distract him, or force him into a pivot that is not healthy for him, because of the engagement model. Are you all in danger of suffocating the startups you'll work with your love? I hope I was characterizing the question right.
Yeah, it's a great question, right? So you're working with a big company like Shell or any of my colleagues here on the stage. I think it's really important that there's a look at the use cases that are available across an organization, and I think I've heard that from each one of us, right? That when we're working with a startup, we look internally to see what use cases are available, because there's likely more than one. And then there needs to be a strategic discussion. And that's really important, right? Where do you want to go as a startup? And how do these use cases align with your strategy? And then there needs to be some joint coming together that, you know what, this is maybe the third most valuable for Shell, but it's the most valuable for you, so it makes sense to start there. A lot of things have to be taken into account when these decisions are made and which use case to go after first. How do we prioritize these? Some of it, for example, is just your global presence and your strategic global expansion plans, because a lot of the opportunities may not be here in India. And if they're in the Middle East or in the US or wherever, how are you prepared and how are you going to actually support and ensure you're setting yourself up for success? It may be better to take something different. Those are the types of discussions that need to be happening with the organization. If they're not happening, you do definitely run a risk of pivoting somewhere you didn't need to be, or setting yourself up for a non-successful experience. The last thought I'll leave you with is I think it's also very healthy to not engage just one, right? You don't have product market fit with a pilot with Shell. That shouldn't be your end goal. It should be to work with, my view is 7 different companies. Maybe some will say 3, 5, 7, whatever it is. But figure out what your strategy is for product market fit, and then focus on that and execute that strategy. It's not just about a solution from one major company.
So you got to get multiple irons in the fire, so to say.
I'll just add to that. So I think of course, the corporate perspective is something that all 3 of you shared, but just advocating a bit for the startup, I think while corporates would follow their very rigorous vetting process, the startup also needs to have a vetting process of their own to see if that strategic alignment is there, whether you are getting the objectives fulfilled that you're looking for, whether it be credibility, whether it's validation for your product, or it is distribution for your product that you are looking to solve for, right? So that process needs to be put in place at the startup as well before you start engaging with the corporate.
One question at the back.
To start a business in India, the legal requirements or the other additional framework, because you cannot have business only with technology alone. So my suggestion to the forum, maybe these kind of programs, if we have maybe parking 15 minutes ahead to have an outline about what are the startups, a brief requirements from a startup point of view, that may add value. Because I have seen many cases where people who are asking, okay, I have a branch here, I want to bring something from outside, how I need to take GST. Some of them already started, they are not even registered. That's a...
Got it. So I think, the IoT forum folks, team here should make note. But I think, Rajshri, you pointed this out a little bit when you were earlier comments of, and I think we were talking about GDPR, and compliance is not a small thing, especially when a large company starts working with maybe a non-compliant or very nascent startup, right? That is an area of risk for you all and possibly for the startup too, right? So maybe you could comment on how
Sure.
do you mitigate against those risks?
Absolutely. So one of the things which I did initially is when we announced and launched our first cohort, I realized, like I said, Rolls-Royce comes under the export compliance for India. And also we operate out of SEZ, which means we cannot have the startups work from our premise. So there's a huge challenge. And how do we share data? Not just that, but in terms of the IP. And are we looking at wanting to commercialize or wanting to productize it? So even when I sat with the IT team and export compliance, I understood there's so many things. They had to go to the bottom, literally at the scrutiny of the technology and its source or origin. So the IP protection has to happen in a multiple way. If example, they just gave an example about if they were to use AI, where is the origin of AI happen? So to that level of scrutiny they have to do, because at the end of the day, tomorrow, it's a risk, whether it's for you or whether it's for me. So we have to do a lot of vetting and going through this legal, export compliance, IT, security, and so many other processes internally before we evolve through the journey. And right now, and what I have done as a proactive, proactive measure is before we go ahead and announce the model going forward next year and being full-fledged, we're making the runway ready, which is to work with all the teams internally, make them understand what open innovation framework is all about and what are the different models one could partner to co-innovate and co-create. And tomorrow when we are there, we know what kind of contracts we need to be in place, what kind of compliance has to be taken into account. All those things, we're already working into it.
Got it. So it's like half a DD that you might do in an M&A almost, right? In some sense, at least the list you ran off there.
Absolutely.
Sounds like that. Good. Any other questions? We got one more. Here. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Vinay from Copro Technologies. A startup's life cycle and speed is a little different. So what do you think startups should know from startup-friendly enterprises on how to help facilitate faster decision-making from large corporations on how to work with startups?
You're all the folks who are supposed to make the decisions fast, right? On behalf of, you're all the gateway to your companies in some sense, and to make sure that the startups don't, face a lot of friction, right?
Okay, I can just answer, probably my colleagues have their own answers too for this, and they have their own experience. But from my experience in the last few months, the way I would look at it is, yes, startups can help make a faster decision making, but when you work with a corporate, the dynamics changes. And then you will have to slow down a little bit. Because when we are going through the journey for the first time, we don't know what we don't know. There are a lot of unknown areas. Probably we think we know this, we've addressed this. And this is where it's getting very interesting and exciting for me, that I'm learning every single day so many different things. And this entire cohort for especially at least at Rolls-Royce, it's been a phenomenal learning experience. And how do we propel faster though we do encounter certain challenges, but how do you address and make it a success is where it's going to define how we innovate.
So let me ask a follow-up question there. Go ahead.
Or maybe to add there, I think you need to see this a little bit. Whoever has worked in a large organization before and is might not now sitting here in the audience, actually when you are in the management level, you're doing almost the same like the startup. If you want to bring through your own ideas how to drive your organization, you have to pitch quite often. And the important thing is to pitch to the right people. And I think that is a very big value we can bring in when you are coming and let me say you want to pitch for a proof of concept which costs $10,000 and you talk to somebody who is running a $100,000 project with a 6% margin, you will probably not get it. So you You need to get to contact to the right people and to pitch there where the people can take decisions. And I think that is where the collaboration actually starts and where also the onboarding helps a lot, so that you can build your network in our organizations and to find out to whom to talk about what. And then once you have the right guy on the hand, who can take the decision, he will take a decision, and that speeds up the process.
Perfect. James, you wanted to add?
Yeah, it's a great question and one that I'm really passionate about. I've spent 8 years trying to make this more seamless. So to add to what my colleagues have shared, I think one thing a startup can do, which I believe was your question, is prepare for the conversations, right? I see a lot of conversations where you figure out who that decision maker is, and it's potentially a fairly senior person in the organization. And I would not go talk to that individual and get a half hour or whatever it is of that individual's time without preparing for that conversation ahead of time, right? Understand some background on the individual, what is important to them, what are their challenges, so that you can bring the right conversation and the right value proposition in that short amount of time that's there. So very important to prepare. I think the other thing is we in these programs are here and work really hard to support the startups, make our job easier. So how can you do that? Understand what corporate needs are. We mentioned GDPR, data security, ethics, safety, these types of things. Think through this. Build that culture into your startups. No better time to start with some of these things than when your company's young, right? Once you have hundreds of employees, to bring in safety culture, ethics culture, or whatever you may have missed out, it's much harder then. Get that in from the beginning. But these are things that when you talk to these senior people, if they feel that you have good answers and that their data is going to be secure with you and you've thought these things through, it makes these conversations a lot easier and it allows us to help you much quicker.
Great, and that's great guidance. I think, maybe Zinnov should do something for startups about, hygiene, structuring for compliance, preparing yourself for an engagement with a startup, right? And,
Absolutely.
Kind of the checklist that you need to have as you're building your structure, your organization and everything else. Any other questions there? Oh, yeah, one, thanks.
I am from agriculture space. I know this is different than what you're trying to. Any learnings specific or generic for people like, for me to take it from your experience?
So are you all looking at biofuels, things like that, agriculture, anything in ag tech that insights?
I think I can add maybe there are companies definitely that are looking at agriculture today in India. Microsoft, for example, is one of them which is looking at agriculture and specifically within the IoT space. So they have been partnering with startups, predict things like what should be the right soil moisture levels, how can you predict the right sowing time for different types of crops, and that hence increase the crop yield. So all of these are IoT and AI use cases that are really propagating in the Indian and global spaces today, and corporates are definitely looking for startups to provide solutions there. And yeah, Microsoft has already proved to take a step there and start some work in that space.
In just from a general knowledge out of my business, right? I've learned one of the countries, I'm not sure if it's New Zealand or which country, but I can come back. I was studying about it and I've quoted about them in my article in IEEE. How should India adopt today to evolving to an agriculture model it doesn't have to depend on the rain, it doesn't have to depend on certain sunlight, and there's a different method altogether. And the yield is quite higher using certain technology and the natural resources that is available and trying to save the environment and have a social impact. Probably I can share that particular link with you, so you can take a look at it.
Instrumented farming of various kinds.
Yes, yes.
So I attended yesterday the session about agriculture, and it was really interesting, and it really struck me about what the challenges of this country are. I know a bit about it due all to the years, but also, let me say, we need to orchestrate more. I think IoT Next is a fantastic event for the startups to come together. And very often we talk about big companies, we are working so much in silos, and I still see a little bit that also the startups are working very much in silos. So we're working in the food and beverage, for example, together with the dairy industry. Now we are including the cooling chain. Now it comes to reselling of the products. The same you can do, actually. If you have a certain area where you work, let me say, on the dairy, for example, and you need to have the connectivity, then you can see outside here the startups who have brought up solutions for bringing the connectivity to the rural area. So actually, you don't need the big players for that. I think you can build a community yourself within Bangalore. You have so many startups that you can have the excellent ground to find end-to-end solution among yourselves.
That's fantastic urging there. And I recall that list from yesterday, that long slide that had, I think, 14 or 15 challenges in agri-tech. That's actually one of the more forwarded things on all my WhatsApp groups now. Everybody is saying, here's all the opportunities in ag-tech, right? And one last question, if there is one. Yes, we have one there. The gentleman in the back. You go ahead and say it out.
Hi, Chetan here. I work for Unisys. I have a question like...
You got to hold the mic closer to you.
Yeah, we hear a lot about startups. I have a question like, is there any scope of starting a startup within a large organization?
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what do you all do for entrepreneurship? Is there a startup culture?
Yeah.
Is there a way for an employee to say, I don't want to resign, but I know what ails this company and I can help you?
Yeah, usually what happens is that if an employee is having a great idea, he come out of organization and he starts his own startup.
Got it.
So
Yeah,
we need to improvise that one.
sometimes all the wisdom is in the people who lead, right? And they take all the best solutions with them.
In Rolls-Royce, we have inculcated a culture called Spark the Park, where it's in India at least in our Square Data Labs. What we have done is we've given the employees on every Friday, the afternoon, they can go and do things that they want to develop. It could be a startup idea they want to, or it could be honing their technology skills or trying to do something which is going to help them evolve through their development, personal development. So through that, entrepreneurship is definitely a game changer, provided it also depends on the interest of the individual. So we do champion that. It's not a force, but it has to come from them, and that's one culture we are definitely promoting.
Great. One last comment? And then
I'll just add a little bit to that. In Shell, we have a program as well, India-focused through E4, where we do a one-week boot camp where employees can come and work on their startup ideas. And then employees are also eligible to apply to the tracks that I mentioned within the E4 program. If they're selected, then they take a sabbatical from Shell, which means they can leave Shell for 6 months up to 2 years. And then if their startup's successful, they formalize that separation. If not, then they can come back and rejoin Shell.
great. So that's an option. Anything yet?
I can also add, let me say, ABB works the same way. We have an innovation program where people can get out of the standard development cycle for typically 3 months to work on their ideas and then bring it back into the product development. Works pretty well. I have not seen a spin-off out of that we really made a startup out of it, but the option is there, and let's see what happens.
Great. So thank you to the 4 panelists. What I'd like to do is have each of you all say, how can somebody contact you if they wanted to? Maybe you can answer that last question. What's the best way to engage with Zinnov? I know we know where you are, but tell us your coordinates maybe.
So you can reach me on email at planko@zinnov.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn.
Wilhelm, how's the best way to reach the ABB Ventures team?
You can contact me directly on email address, my name, wilhelm.wiese@in.abb.com, or otherwise just via LinkedIn, and just drop me a message and we can connect.
Great.
You can definitely reach me on my LinkedIn as well as my email ID, rajashri.rao@Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce is rolls-royce.com, and my number is there. You can even call me, WhatsApp me on my mobile number, which is 63663 78264. We can leave the contacts, and definitely you can come back.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Yeah, same here. LinkedIn, a lot of startups reach out to me through LinkedIn, and then my email is james.unterreiner@shell.com.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you very much. You bring our show to a close almost. It's the penultimate session. And I hope, good hunting for startups, and I hope startups have a very good engaging model with you all, in the coming year. Thank you.
Thank you. Give them a big hand of applause. The panelists can stay for a minute. I would like to request Purnima Shanai, co-founder Gain, and Joy Chawatu, Thai charter member, to come and present the mementos. Thank you all. Thank you all, panel. It was really great having you. Have you?
Good session.